Hello, welcome to O and Idem's Verse series. And we live in a rather noisy world, metaphorically and literally too, but some very relevant voices get drowned in this soundscape. And Professor David Harrison's voice is gentle, but an urgent voice. Our guest, Professor Harrison, dons many hats, and of the many things that he is, he's a linguist and an anthropologist who also teaches cognitive science and is the author of many books, one of which I've got here, When Languages Die. And now it is therefore quite clear that Professor Harrison is unwilling to be shut in or boxed as a specialist of one and only one thing, and strongly resists the culture of specialization, I believe. So a very warm welcome to you, David. And I just want to, just say a bit about what linguistics and anthropology, how it is defined by dictionaries, OED to go with, which linguistics is very plainly defined as the scientific study of language that involves study of the structure, grammar, syntax, phonetics, etc. And anthropology is defined as the study of the human race, especially of its origin, development, customs, and beliefs. So we have in Professor Harrison a combination of the two. So we shall find out what does the combination mean. So what does the knowledge of the two sciences do for you?
Well, hello, Lakshmi. First of all, thank you so much for hosting me on your program. And I would like to extend my warmest greetings to all of your viewers, both in India and around the world, and my admiration and support for what you are doing to promote cultures. Thank you for your question. Linguistics and anthropology, historically, they were very closely allied disciplines, or you could even consider them to be the same discipline. I consider linguistics to be part of anthropology because anthropology is the study of humans and everything that humans do and everything that they create. And among the many incredible cultural creations, to me, the most impressive is not the Taj Mahal, let's say, or the Great Wall of China, or material things that people have created. But to me, the most impressive cultural creation are languages and the kind of art and complexity that people create with languages. Of course, the Taj Mahal and the Great Wall of China are also impressive creations of human culture. But language is really something special. So I have devoted my academic career to studying the world's 7,000 languages, not all 7,000, of course, but many of them, and meeting speakers of some of the most endangered languages in the world, and recording some of the knowledge that they have chosen to share with me and with the world, and providing a platform so that people can appreciate these languages and the knowledge they contain.
Yes. And in one of your interviews, you very profoundly unpack an aspect of how we others, tend to judge things from our point of view. And I'm just quoting you here. You said, your own way of thinking is culturally contingent. It is not natural in any sense. It is filtered through your own culture. So, how was it for you when you first set out into this world of languages and cultures?
Well, the dream and the mission of an anthropologist is to try to step outside of his or her own culture and to be both an observer and a participant in other cultures. And I've been very fortunate to be hosted by amazing people in many cultures around the world, including in India, who have allowed me to step into their culture as a guest and to experience it through their eyes. And when you do that, you definitely have some culture shock, but the culture shock comes when you realize that things that you thought were just the way the world is turn out to be cultural choices. I can give you the simplest possible example. In English, we have a counting system based on the number 10. Unless we're counting time, then we have a counting system based on the number 12. But mostly we count based on the number 10. And we think that this is natural. Maybe there's something about the universe that necessitates a base 10 counting system. But when you visit other cultures, you find that they construct mathematics and numerical concepts differently. There are cultures that base their counting on 6, cultures that base their counting on 4, cultures that base their counting on 12 or 20. There are many different ways of counting. So I asked a colleague, a friend of mine who's a mathematician, I said, is there something basic about the universe that necessitates a 10-based counting system? Or could we use some other counting system? And my friend, the mathematician, said, no, there's nothing essential about a 10-based counting system. You can use any base you want. There are different ways to do mathematics, but I had never thought of that before I encountered it. Different counting systems in other languages. So that's just one small example, but you suddenly realize that counting by tens is not an essential quality of the universe. It's a cultural choice.
Right. And you've taken your interest particularly is in endangered languages of the world. And what led you to that? When did you realize that this is what I want to pursue? And was it incidental? I'm curious.
It really was serendipitous. It was a happy coincidence. I was a student of languages and cultures, and I was living in and studying in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. And I was meeting many different kinds of people, but a really important encounter happened for me in Lithuania. Lithuania is a small country. It used to be part of the Soviet Union. Now it's independent. And I was in a small town in Lithuania, and I had heard that in that town, there lived some of the very last speakers of an endangered language. The language is called Karaim. And so I just got this idea in my head, and I had a little cassette tape recorder. And I went out walking around the village, and I just started asking people. I said, I'm from the United States. I'm visiting. I would like to meet a speaker of Karaim language. And someone that I met said, oh, come with me. And he brought me to the house of a gentleman. His name was Mikolas Firkovicius. And he was not only one of the last speakers of this language, but he was a spiritual and cultural leader of the community. And he very generously invited me into his home. He shared the language with me. He allowed me to make some recordings. And I was just so excited by that encounter. And also felt a sense of urgency that this language is probably going to disappear in my lifetime. Indeed, Mr. Firkovicius passed away a few years after that. I still have the recordings that he shared with me. And the language Karaim is indeed extremely endangered, only has maybe 20 or 30 speakers or so. But now the community is making some efforts to revitalize this language. And so the recordings that I made more than 20 years ago now could be useful to them in that respect.
Yes, that's very interesting. And your research in a remarkable way sheds light on the vast knowledge reserves that languages hold, on living sustainably And now there is environmental linguistics, thanks to you. What is environmental linguistics? And I have a second part to this question, which is, at what level of schooling or education could it be introduced to students?
Thank you for that question. The term environmental linguistics, I think, is somewhat new, but the intellectual pursuit of knowledge about the environment has been going on forever. So you can look back into the history of humanity, and some of the very earliest writings that come down to us on clay tablets are lists of words, and they contain words for different kinds of animals, different kinds of plants. And so people have always been collecting names for things in the environment, and people have always been naming things in the environment. So you can't really separate language and environment. If you talk to a biologist, they will tell you that most of the plant species that are estimated to exist in the world have not yet been scientifically documented. They do not have Latin scientific names, but if you talk to local people, so I've spent a lot of time in Northeast India, in Arunachal Pradesh, talking to local people. They know all the plants that grow in their environment, and they know which plants are poisonous, which plants are edible, which plants can be used for medicines, and they have names for these plants in their languages. So there is a vast knowledge base, but in order to access it, we have to step outside of our own scientific bias, right? And be willing to appreciate the knowledge that people have. And that knowledge is, I think it holds some of the keys to survival on this planet and to sustainability and to adapting to climate change. It's knowledge that should be valued by everyone, but you have to go to remote places and you have to talk to local people to access that knowledge. So I came up with the idea of environmental linguistics. I thought that as a linguist, as a trained linguist, I should learn more about the environment, more about plants and animals, and I should work with local people to help curate that knowledge. So I've been building talking dictionaries and other tools like that, where we can archive and preserve names for plants, names for animals, important environmental concepts from endangered languages.
Yes, and at what level of education would you recommend this could be introduced?
Well, children are naturally curious about the environment. And if you visit indigenous communities, children do go to school, of course, but they also spend time with their parents in the rice fields or in the forest or in the environment. And so children are learning about the environment from a very young age. They're learning the names for plants and animals. And so childhood is really where people begin having a fascination with the environment, and they begin learning this knowledge. The problem happens when children who are speakers of minority languages, when they go to school, that's when the problems begin, because their home language, their village language, is not valued typically in the school. And sometimes it's even forbidden in the school. And they're told, okay, you're at school now, you have to speak Hindi and English and, the languages of education, and you're not allowed to speak the language of your home or your village. So this creates a pressure on those languages, and children may begin to abandon the languages or forget the languages or think that they are not valuable. And so when that happens and they shift over to speaking majority languages, the environmental knowledge is lost. And so we're losing the knowledge base that is of great value and that is only found in small indigenous languages.
Yes, and going from there, from an India perspective to that, what you've just spoken about, it's multilingual. We have scripted languages. We have languages that are still just in the orality phase, even today. And we live. This is a post-colonial country where we still are trying to explore nationalism through one language, and the dust hasn't settled on what is going to be your national language. And when you talk about children going to school and experiencing this, linguistic shaming is extremely concerning and debilitating to students. And I myself, because I do speak three languages fluently, and Malayalam is my mother tongue, which is from southern India, and I do speak Hindi because in some way or the other, um, it it is sort of even today discussed as the potential to be the national language or whatever. But I do recall experiencing linguistic shaming, and you know being pushed towards wanting to not say that I speak, or this is my mother tongue, Malayalam. So there are children who go through that. So I find this very interesting that you talk about it. And how could schools and community in this new global scenario do away with this problem?
Well, actually, I think India is in some ways very progressive and is a role model for the world about how to have a plurilingual, multilingual society. There are 22, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
or maybe even 24 official languages
yeah.
in India. That is an astonishing number. I can't think of any country in the world that has that many official languages. Of course, that's still only a fraction because no one knows exactly how many languages are spoken in India. You can look at the Ethnologue, which is the definitive catalog of the world's languages, and I think it has something like 450 or maybe 500 languages listed for India. You can look at the Linguistic Survey of India, which is also of excellent quality. But in the census of India, when they count ethnic groups, this is my understanding, groups that are fewer than 10,000 people don't get counted separately. So there are still, I think, some hidden languages in India. One example of that is the Koro-Aka language, which my team and I researched starting in 2012. And they're featured on the cover of my book, The Last Speaker. So when we visited, let me see if I can get this into focus. I'll send you an image later. When we visited the community where this language is spoken, we were there to document another language, a language called Russo-Aka, which has maybe between 10 and 20,000 speakers. So. And the speakers of that language, they said, "Oh, have you heard the other dialect of our language?" And we said, "No, we haven't heard it." And they said, "Well, go down to this particular village and you'll hear the other dialect. It's just a little different, right?" So we thought it was literally a dialect, potato, potato. It would have slight differences in pronunciation and maybe the lexicon. But when we got there and we began recording it, it was as different as English and Japanese. It was nothing like the other language, even though the local people who speak it said, "Oh, it's just a dialect," right? But once we began recording it scientifically and documenting it and publishing some of our results, we were able to establish that Koro-Aka is not a dialect of anything. It's its own unique language with its unique grammar, unique history. And so now you can add one to the ethnologue list of languages of India. But I suspect that there are many other scenarios like that in India where something that is just locally thought of as a dialect or not very different or not very important, actually, once it's documented, it will be considered a language in its own right. So the number of languages in India will continue to grow as smaller languages are documented. And, India is also a place where multilingualism is the norm. I'm very envious, having grown up in the United States in a monolingual household, I'm very envious of people who have the privilege of growing up multilingual. Um, it really expands your mind and it expands your horizons. So I think this is something that in India is not only valued, but it's considered the norm.
Yes.
Um, so, I think we can look to India for some enlightened policies and practices, even though you said that you felt some linguistic shame as a speaker of Malayalam.
Yes.
And I acknowledge that. But at the same time, I think we can look to India as a kind of a model of what a plurilingual society can be. And it's very inspiring.
Thank you. And similarly, there's this the present attitudes towards oral cultures. Is it concerning for you? Because
Yes, you mentioned orality, the orality of languages. So this is a very important point. And those of us who grow up in literate societies, we have a very strong bias. We believe that literacy is a more advanced stage of development. And that's why we refer to people who don't read and write as illiterate. Notice the prefix on that word, illiterate. It's a pejorative prefix. We make a value judgment that someone who doesn't read or write is somehow deficient. They're lacking something. And I have personal experience in my family. So my mother-in-law, who lives in Vietnam, and she is a speaker of the Hakka language, which is a variety of Chinese. She does not read or write because in her generation, girls were not sent to school. So I have personal experience. Plus, I've met in my travels many people who do not read or write. What we as people from literate cultures fail to notice is that people in oral cultures have mental superpowers. Why do I say that? Because they memorize everything. Everything. I am not even capable of memorizing a mobile phone number. If you were to give me your mobile phone number, I would immediately have to get my phone and immediately enter it into this device because I know that my brain is simply not capable of memorizing a string of 9 number digits. It's not capable. Maybe I never had that ability, or maybe I lost that ability, but I think our whole society has lost that ability because of literacy and because we have the ability to offload information. People in oral societies keep all of that information in their heads, vast amounts of information. I have met storytellers who can recite 10,000 lines of a story. Having never seen it in writing, never encountered it in writing, it is 100% orally transmitted. That to me seems like a superpower. I can't even imagine. We don't even know from a cognitive point of view, we don't even know what the cognitive mechanism for achieving that amount of memorization. So I have a great appreciation for oral cultures. I do not disparage them. Sometimes oral cultures are given literacy by missionaries or by language activists, and sometimes they invent it for themselves. And sometimes they choose not to adopt literacy, even though they may learn to read and write in Hindi or English or some other language, but they choose not to have literacy in their native language. I think that's a choice that different cultures have to make on their own. We should not try to impose on them that they have to have literacy in their native tongue. And we should appreciate the incredible cognitive feats that people in oral societies can perform that we cannot do. So in some ways, they actually have some superiority to us in terms of what they can do with language.
If I could share with you that with Sanskrit and what is left of it, what we have is a result of orality. And interestingly, the Sanskrit grammarian from ancient India used to frown upon people who learned to read and write.
Oh.
Just like how we would use the term illiterate. he used to call them likhita pathakas, which meant people who were trying to read and write, which he frowned upon.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. Yes, I completely appreciate that point of view. Orality is really something special and to be appreciated. And it's not incompatible. People, of course, can learn to read or write if they choose to. But it shouldn't be a quality by which we judge a society and say that somehow they are deficient or lacking or undeveloped because of this.
This is one of the areas that we work in, which is particularly of interest to us, where the oral tradition, especially because of storytelling and poetry, that we are keen on, and the relationship between grandchildren and grandparents are being replaced rapidly by devices today. So that is something that we are keen on. And you have mentioned in your book, talked about storytelling, and you've talked about ethno-botanical information that does not get passed on from generation to generation when languages die, which is again the oral side of it. So is it only the endangered aspect that, or endangered languages that you're worried about? But don't you think there's a trend in general decline in oral tradition?
Absolutely. And yes, of course, we all live in a technologized world. India is, at the forefront of many technologies. And I have young children who like to spend a lot of time working, with tablets and electronic devices. So I appreciate technology is not just a threat. It is also a vehicle, and it can be used to sustain cultures. I've been working to help a number of small languages, endangered languages, cross the digital divide. To have a presence on the internet, to have talking dictionaries, or to have a video archive of stories. So I think digital tools can be very helpful. There are some positive values to technologization and to globalization. As long as people have free choices and they can adopt the technologies they want. And so many of the world's small languages, such as Koro Aka, spoken in northeastern India, before they were recorded by my research team, you couldn't find even a single word of these languages anywhere on the internet. You couldn't hear them anywhere.
My name is Anthony Digyo. I'm from India. I'm the speaker of Koro Aka language. I would like to say some of the name of the national plant. It's a fern name, as we know as in Koro language. It's known as rumdik. It is used for making a medicine of rice beer, and it is also used for insects repellents.
They only existed in a small community in a remote area in the Himalayas in oral tradition. And so now we can use technology to add value to those languages. Now they have been recorded. The community has shared them with the world. They have a global audience, a global voice. It can be very empowering. And, we can't think about the fate of languages if we don't know about them, right? And so now the world has an opportunity to know that Koro Aka and other small languages exist. Before we had no access to them, we had no knowledge of them. And now that we know about them, we can care about them, and we can advocate for enlightened policies and a better educational system that will accommodate those languages. So we can support linguistic diversity, and as you mentioned, biodiversity, knowledge of plants and animals. We can support both linguistic diversity and biodiversity by using various technology platforms.
Yes. And there are so many fascinating things in this book, and I read and reread to just go back to some of the things that you talk about. And you talk about cognitive science, and you do give an example of rare language. In you talk about the word order of the language of Urarina.
Urarina, yes. There's an Amazonian language called
Could you tell
Urarina.
us a bit about that for our?
Well, it's interesting. Linguistics in the 20th century and now into the 21st, linguistics was largely dominated by the ideas and the theories of Professor Noam Chomsky from MIT, who had a theory of universal grammar. And the theory of universal grammar says that basically, at a deep level, languages are more alike than they are dissimilar. And if you go deeply into languages, you can find the basic structures, basic building blocks. And so, on that view, linguistic diversity is not really that important. And protecting linguistic diversity is not that important because languages are kind of, at some level, basically all the same. And there were many linguists working in that Chomskyan tradition looking for universal grammar. And from time to time, they would propose what they thought was a universal. So word order is a very basic fact about languages. In a typical language, like in English, you put the subject first, you put the verb second, you put the object last, right? I ate an apple. That's the word order of English. Other languages put words in different order. But as far as we knew, there was no language that puts the object first and then the verb and then the subject, right? That's kind of the backwards order from English. And because we hadn't seen a language that was built that way, people made theories that that was actually impossible, that that order would never occur in any language. It was cognitively impossible. Well, as soon as you make a theory like that, of course, people are going to go out and look for exceptions. And so the language Urarina provided an exception to that and say, well, we thought that this wasn't possible. This kind of structure was not possible in the human language. We thought this was something universal, something about the brain maybe. But now we have an example of a real language that does this. And so my thinking is that while the theory of universal grammar is somewhat interesting, it's premature because we haven't really sampled most of the world's languages. We don't have a description, a technical scientific description of more than, say, 20% of the world's languages. So it's too soon to say what might be universal across all languages or what might be idiosyncratic or particular. It's simply too soon. And we have a lot of work to do. We still have about 80% of the world's languages that are awaiting scientific documentation. And that is really the important work that linguists should be doing, is getting out there and recording and documenting these languages. And because many of them are also endangered, there is a sense of urgency that we should do it soon, sooner rather than later. And then once we've collected a sample of most of the world's languages, then maybe we can sit down and try to figure out what's common to all languages or what is unique.
Yes, that makes a lot more sense. But it was very interesting to read about that because when you're thinking linguistics and when you're reading, these are things that hit you, and there's so much out there that's still unknown, and that's baffling, and but it's very humbling as well to know. And here in the East, we're also faced with what we call academic imperialism. And uh, uh, Professor Chandrakant Raju, who's a mathematician from India, he's spoken about it a lot. He talks about he says academic imperialism begins with Western education, which has not been seriously challenged in hard sciences.
What has happened is that in India, we are following what we learned from colonial education is that the West is superior, imitate them. So we are waiting for them to do something before we make a change. And actually what we should do is we should re-examine the whole education system and ask ourselves, what do we want from it? And we should want knowledge from it. Not merely a job at the end of the day. I mean, a job is something that comes along with it. You need a means of livelihood. Nobody denies that. But that should not be the sole goal.
Yes.
That, I think, is a major problem caused by colonial education. It has devalued entire education for the colonized.
And so I wanted to ask you, how has colonization and the discovery paradigm affected languages globally?
Yes. Well, as I mentioned earlier, if you talk to, let's say, a botanist, I've been working with a lot of botanists recently, and they do very important work because most of the world's plants have not been scientifically documented, and many of the world's animals too. And every year you have organizations like the World Wildlife Fund. They announce new species discoveries, right? So this is what I call the false discovery paradigm, because they might say, there were a new species of bird was discovered in Madagascar, or a new species of butterfly was discovered in Vietnam. And it's true, these animals may be new to science, but if you talk to local people, they typically know all of the animals that live in their environment and most of the plants. And they not only know them, but they have names for them in the local languages, and they also, through centuries of scientific experimentation and trial and success or trial and error, they have scientifically discovered the medicinal properties and the useful properties of all these plants. So humans have always been scientists, and people who live in indigenous cultures are also scientists. They are geneticists, they are plant scientists, they are conservation scientists. They have their own systems of understanding and manipulating the genome of, for example, rice. But their science is not respected or acknowledged in the Western sort of colonial tradition, which says that science is done by trained, people who have high degrees in education and wear a lab coat and work in a laboratory. That's science. And if they discover something, it's a discovery. But if an indigenous culture created a new strain of rice, for example, that can resist drought or flooding, we don't credit that as science. So part of what I'm advocating for in my work on endangered languages is a more equitable understanding of human intellect and human creativity and science, and giving cultures credit for the scientific knowledge that they have without stealing it from them. So we don't want to create a situation where the pharmaceutical companies will come in and take plants that indigenous people know about and monetize them and make medicines from them with no benefit back to the community. So that's also a concern.
Okay.
But I think the important step is just to recognize that indigenous people are also scientists. They have very deep knowledge of the environment. They have been experimenting with plants for many centuries, and they have created a vast knowledge base. But this knowledge base is only found in their language, and it's in the oral tradition. So you can't Google it, you can't look it up in a database.
Yes. You've also talked, you did mention the counting system and up to 10, and then how we have time up to 12. And so you also feature seasons and calendars of cultures and communities in the book. So today, when we look at it today, how relevant is this wisdom to us with climate change and things upon us?
It's very relevant. Humans have been keeping time forever. Why? Because their survival depended on it. They had to notice all different kinds of seasonal cycles. What happens at what type of year, at what time of year, and what do we need to do next? So humans are actually very good at timekeeping. From a Western kind of colonial perspective, time didn't exist until people invented mechanical clocks and calendars. Then suddenly time existed, right? But from an indigenous perspective, people have always been paying careful attention to the stars, to the sun, to the moon, to the cycles of plants and animals. And they have created what are called environmental calendars, which are very precise timekeeping devices. In some sense, the environmental calendars are even more accurate than our solar calendar, because if you think about our solar calendar, it gets out of sync. And so every 4 years, we have to add February 29th, we have to add a leap day in order to get our calendar back into alignment with the sun. But indigenous calendars based on environmental cycles, they actually have their own internal mechanisms for staying in sync. So they never need a leap day to get them back on track. They stay on track, and they're highly accurate, and they're highly adaptable, and they show how people have been responding and adapting to environmental changes, including climate change. So you might have a month that is named for a particular plant that blooms in that month or is ready to be harvested or collected in that month. And that's part of the local timekeeping understanding that in this month, this plant is ready for harvesting. So what happens with climate change if things get out of sync, if because of warmer temperatures, that plant blooms earlier than expected, right?
Yeah.
Well, environmental calendars have the ability to adapt to that. They can rename the month for something else, or they can make some other adjustments. So we have many examples from around the world of these ancient timekeeping systems that are highly accurate, that are survival tools, and that are adaptable to change. It's a very impressive system.
Yes. No, I found that very interesting, going through the book. And also, you did mention visiting Arunachal Pradesh, and is there anything in particular that you could tell us that's which is related to environment of the Koro speaking people, and you found that interesting?
Yes, it was a great privilege for me to visit Arunachal Pradesh several occasions. It is an incredibly diverse part of India. I think something like 140 scheduled tribes live in the area. It's also very accessible. You have to have special permission to go there. I think even Indian citizens have to have a special permit to go into Arunachal Pradesh. But once you get there, the people are very friendly. They're very welcoming. English is the official language of the state, because I have only very basic Hindi. So I had the advantage in Arunachal Pradesh is that many people speak English fluently, and they speak an indigenous or tribal language. So I could directly access the indigenous languages like Koro Aka without having to go through Hindi. We could go directly from English to Koro Aka. So that was great. And as far as knowledge of the environment, they lead fairly traditional lifestyles. They grow rice. They have buffalo, which are a source of their wealth. They grow fruits like oranges. They frequently go into the jungle, and they know how to harvest and collect many, many, many different plants that have medicinal properties, that can be used to build traditional houses, can be used to make baskets, can be used to make textiles. So they're a very nature-based society. At the same time, of course, they have all the modern amenities and technologies that anyone else has. So they're on social media, they're on Facebook, they have smartphones, they have all those things, but at the same time, they have maintained very traditional things like hunting with bow and arrow, weaving baskets, weaving textiles. And so it's a really remarkable combination of tradition and technology. So I really admire them for that. They have a lot of cultural pride. They understand the value of their cultures, even though there may only be a few thousand people who speak a particular language. They're proud of that language. They're, for the most part, not giving up their languages. They acquire other languages. Everyone is multilingual, so it's common to meet people in Arunachal Pradesh who speak 5 or 6 languages, but they're not giving up the heritage languages. So I think it's really a bright spot, given that we have a language extinction crisis happening in the world, right? I think Arunachal Pradesh is really a bright spot and shows how people can keep their cultures and traditions while at the same time adopting technologies and being global citizens.
Yes. So we are facing, at a rapid rate, you did mention that we are going to lose half of world's language. I mean, we shouldn't say we are going to, I shouldn't say that, I'm sorry. We anticipate that could be the case.
Yes, so languages are ranked they can be classified on a scale of endangerment. And language endangerment begins to happen. It's actually independent of the number of speakers. The number of speakers alone does not tell you if a language is endangered or not. What tells you is the transmission rate. So the question you want to ask when you visit a language community is, what percentage of children are growing up speaking the language? And by that measure, you can see that even a very large language like Shanghainese is a language spoken in China. It has tens of millions of speakers, but the younger generation is very rapidly shifting to speaking Mandarin. So even a language with tens of millions of speakers can become endangered in a couple of generations. Speakers of Shanghainese recognize that their language is endangered, even though it has tens of millions of speakers. Conversely, a language that has a very small population, 100 people living on an island in the Pacific, can be safe and stable as long as the children are learning it. It is not endangered. So it isn't the sheer number that tells you the story of endangerment. It's the percentage of children speaking the language. And in Arunachal Pradesh, I see, hopeful signs, because you can go through the villages there and you hear that the children are speaking the local language, whatever that may be. And then they're learning English and Hindi as second or third language.
Okay. So when you talk about transmission, I think this is the time to ask you, raising children in a multilingual or a bilingual environment, how important is it, or what are the encouraging aspects of that for parents who might be shifting to, say English or Hindi and not the native language?
Yes, I think if a person has the opportunity to grow up in a bilingual or multilingual society, that is a wonderful thing. It helps them expand their horizons, their thinking, their mind. I grew up as a monolingual person, and I was able to learn languages a little bit later in life, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities I had to learn languages. I wish I had acquired languages in childhood. And so it's very valuable, and it should be seen as a social and cognitive asset for people who are multilingual. I think it really is. It's an amazing thing, and it allows you to, because languages have different patterns of thinking and they bring different ideas and concepts to your mind. Many people who are bilingual, they have this feeling that depending on which language they're speaking, their personality is slightly different, their thought patterns are slightly different, so it's adding extra dimensions and values to who you are as a person, I think, when you acquire languages. So, my wish is that we create a world that is friendly for multilingualism and that supports multilingualism and views it as a social asset. And I think we all benefit from that. And we all benefit from linguistic diversity. Languages have so much to contribute, no matter how small a population or how remote a language may be. They have vital knowledge that they can contribute to the rest of the world. And so we should appreciate that.
Thank you. And, thank you so much for your time. And despite the time difference and everything, we were able to manage this conversation with you. Before you go, any projects that will bring you to India? Are there anything like that? What are you working on currently? And, just so we can access your books and films, the film that you made, is where can we find these? If you could just also let our viewers know.
Sure, I'd be happy to follow up to provide some links. The film, The Linguists, which was partly filmed in India, as far as I know, it's not currently available on any streaming platform. So I regret to say that I don't own the copyright to the film. There's a trailer that you can view online. I also have my own YouTube channel, and I will share the link. And I have many videos on my YouTube channel of speakers of small minority and endangered languages of India, telling stories and showing their culture. And so I think that would be of interest to some of your viewers. So I'll be happy to share my YouTube channel with you, and a link to my books about endangered languages. And of course, I would love to come to India again at any time. It is such an inspiring country, both linguistically and culturally. And I've always felt very, very welcome there, and have a deep appreciation for the diverse nature of Indian society.
And from both the organizations that we are conducting this interview with you, we extend a very warm welcome to you, and we'll be very happy to. It'll be a pleasure and an honor to host you if your work brings you to India again.
Thank you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, David.